So what if you could understand a political figure not as a person to debate, but as a system to be decoded? Well, that's the whole idea behind Crispia Reeves' book, Inside Leader's Mind, Trump. Think of it less like a biography and more like a user manual, one designed to predict behavior. Let's dive in. The book kicks off with a really blunt premise. The author argues that after years of moral outrage, after fact-checkers have documented over 30,000 false claims, after 2 impeachments and even 34 felony convictions, the usual methods of opposition just haven't worked. They've failed spectacularly. So the book asks a pretty critical question. If all that outrage is, strategically useless, what's left? What's the alternative? And the answer the book lands on is understanding. Not understanding to excuse the behavior, but understanding to predict it. The goal is to map out the psychological architecture, the source code, if you will, so you can anticipate the system's next move with, well, a pretty high degree of accuracy. So you can see the book is trying to do something different here. It's not about arguing about things that have already happened. It's about spotting the deep, consistent patterns that drive behavior, which could make the future a whole lot less surprising. So, where does an operating system like this even come from? The author traces it right back to its origins, arguing that the core programming was installed during a few really critical, formative moments in childhood. The book hones in on 3 key events. First, when he was just 2.5, his mother had a sudden, near-fatal illness. She was gone for a whole year during a really critical time for a child's development. Second, when he was 13, his father basically exiled him to military school. And finally, at 27, he meets the infamous lawyer Roy Cohn, who became, you could say, his dark mentor. From that kind of environment, the book argues 2 huge lessons were learned. The first was a direct command from his father. If you want to survive in this world, you have to be a killer. And the second lesson? Well, that was a cautionary tale. The fate of his older brother Freddie, who was a sensitive guy and, in the family's eyes, was basically destroyed because he wasn't ruthless enough. Now, to build this killer persona, his father gave him more than just lessons. A lot more. According to a Pulitzer-winning investigation by the New York Times, which the book cites, Trump got what would be today at least $413 million from his father's empire, often through some pretty shady tax schemes. And this is where you see the massive disconnect the book talks about. You have that financial reality on one side, and on the other, you have this carefully built public myth of the self-made billionaire, a story that became absolutely central to his identity. Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the user manual, the psychological algorithms. These are the unchanging patterns the book argues have driven his behavior for decades, no matter what situation he's in. The central concept the book uses is something called malignant narcissism. Now, it's really important to get this. The author stresses this isn't just an insult they're throwing around. It's a clinical term used for its predictive power, describing a specific mix of traits: narcissism, antisocial behavior, paranoia, and even sadism. One of the key patterns the book identifies is what it calls the vengeance algorithm. Think of it in 3 steps. First, every single slight, big or small, gets recorded. It goes into a permanent ledger. Second, all criticism is personalized. It's not about policy, it's a deep personal attack. And third, revenge gets executed without any statute of limitations whenever the opportunity comes up. Then you've got what the book calls the dominance machine, his operating system for dealing with people. And it runs on a very simple set of rules. The world is just winners and losers. That's it. Every single interaction is a contest that you have to win. Compromise or apologizing? That's for the weak. Loyalty is absolute, but it only goes one way. And maybe the biggest rule, being ignored is way worse than being hated. Now, the crucial insight here is how this code actually works in the real world. The author argues that shamelessness is a superpower. It's what allows things that other people would see as total failures, like, say, 6 corporate bankruptcies, to be reframed not as defeats, but as proof that you're a smart businessman who knows how to game the system. And maybe the most powerful piece of evidence for the book's argument that this code is permanent comes from the man himself. He once said, "When I look at myself in the 1st grade, I'm basically the same." The book presents this not as a boast, but as a confession. All right, so if the code really is this consistent, then you should be able to predict what's going to do next, right? Well, the last part of the book uses this model to forecast what's coming. So what does this user manual tell us? This quote from the 2016 convention is held up as the ultimate mission statement of that grandiose self. Not we, not our team, but I, alone. It's like the operating system speaking its most fundamental truth right out loud. So this all leads to the book's central prediction. The system will keep running its core programs, relentlessly, seeking revenge, demanding loyalty, attacking any perceived threats. But what it won't do, the author argues, is learn, adapt, or change. Those patterns are locked in. And this chart really illustrates what that could look like in practice. The book predicts that the focus of a potential second term would be overwhelmingly personal. You see retribution and loyalty tests taking up most of the bandwidth, with traditional policymaking getting just a tiny slice of the pie. And that brings us right back to the book's guiding principle. This whole psychological profile, from the childhood wounds to predictions for the future, isn't about judging. It's about utility. It's about using a deep understanding of the system to predict what it's going to do. At the end of the day, the author's conclusion is as simple as it is profound. This psychological code installed decades ago. It can't be updated, it can't be patched or rewritten, it can only be run over and over again. And so this analysis leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling question to think about. If you have a completely predictable psychological system with fixed inputs and fixed outputs, what happens when that rigid, unchanging code collides with the chaos and complexity of a very unpredictable world?